Welcome to Burn the Ship. This is a podcast where entrepreneurs connect with professionals that can help you go all in on your business. We talk to people that have walked the walk, talked the talk, been through all the things that we experience as small business owners, come out the other side of that journey with more skills, more experiences that they're willing to share with us so that we can be more successful entrepreneurs. So, John, thank you for being here today. Anyone that shares some time with me, shares some time with the audience, it means a ton to me. I look forward to learning some stuff from you and being able to connect you with some people in my network that I hope share the same vision as you. But why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to us?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Anytime.
So I started my entrepreneurial program a long, long time ago. We had a family of people that ran their own businesses. It was pretty interesting. I had an uncle who they wanted to when he actually passed away, they didn't know what to say on his epitaph. So because they didn't want to put down con man, so they decided to put entrepreneur down, which I thought was interesting. It was more about, trying to get out and be on his own and do his own thing. And he was always trying to find a way to help other people, but as well as to start his own business. So my dad also owned a small hardware store, so he went through a lot of trials and tribulations, especially when places like Home Depot and Lowe's came in to the local neighborhood and eventually ended up shutting him down. So you see the good and the bad of it. Um, I started my first company, sort of had a little bit of experience in the corporate world, working in oil and gas. After I came in out of that, I started my own company after going to business school. We were providing information from refiners to wholesale marketers. Well, it was a process that was being done by fax machine, and we were going to revolutionize the fax machine or the way that process was actually getting done and get rid of the fax machine. We were actually relatively successful, raised a couple of $1 million back then. It was probably around 2000. Did it all in the kind of a back of a napkin. Raised about $3 million from a $1 billion fund and started going. I said, wow, this is actually pretty easy. Took me about 6 or 8 months after going through about 20 different companies to finally get there, but I didn't think it was that difficult at all. We raised the money. We started working on the process, and I moved down to Houston because that's where oil is and oil does. Little did we know we were one of the first SaaS-based companies. SaaS wasn't even a word back then.
Right.
But then all of a sudden in 2000, we ended up getting caught in the dot-com bubble. And the investors came to me and said, well, you know what? I hate to tell you this, but if we haven't invested, you got to remember there's a $1 billion fund. Said if we haven't invested $50 million in your company already, we're going to have to let you go. And I said, well, okay, well, there's a good way to cure that. At this point, I needed about another, $43 million. They said, you can just give that to me and then we can hit the $50 million mark. As you might expect, they said no. So we actually ended up having to close the company down. Interestingly enough, the about 5 years after that, somebody called me up and says, "Hey, do you want to start this company back up again?" And I said, "Why?" And he says, "Well, they still haven't figured it out yet." So even though people were interested, it might just have been timing. It might have just been, we were 5, 6 years earlier than where we should have been when that technology was coming out, and then we got caught in the dot bomb bubble. Um, After that, I actually ended up moving back up to Connecticut and hooked up with another guy, and we started another company. And this company provided facilities advice to colleges and universities. That one's actually ended up being quite successful. In the end, we sold it for a very high multiple of EBITDA, primarily because we were doing things that other people weren't doing, which was we were collecting data from colleges and universities and comparing it to each other from a facility standpoint, how many buildings you have, energy usage per square foot, things of that nature, which allowed them to then compare to see how well they were doing against others. And this gave them the data. We took data, turned it into information, which generated knowledge, which allowed them to do some sort of an action. And they were actually then very happy because they could take action off the data they had. So it was one of the earlier data companies. Did that for about 10 years or so. The company ended up getting sold and is still part of a much larger organization at this point in time. Since then, I've been doing a lot of work with small companies, a lot of management consulting. I also do mentoring for group called the Clean Tech Open. They're actually a national accelerator, quite successful. I've been there for about 12 years or so now, being one of their lead mentors. Interestingly enough, my company today, NTP Technologies, which started a couple of years ago, we not only I not only was a mentor, but I ended up being a, a participant in the program, and we did quite well. And it's very interesting taking something, a look from the other side. Here you are mentoring people about their companies and how to do things a little differently and think outside the box on some things and have they thought of this or that. Yet when it becomes you're the one that's actually being scrutinized, it really makes you think about things because sometimes you just get too close to your business and you don't realize some of the things, a different way of thinking about something. And it really changed the way I approach the business. So that's kind of me right now. I'm still working on that company, um, and still helping others, and that's why I think this podcast is a great thing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Why? Tell me more about NTP specifically, because when we talked on the phone, it seems not completely unique, but a little unique compared to some of the stuff that you've done in the past, just because of the way that they plan to kind of enter the market. And I think additionally, because like you said, SaaS wasn't really a term when you started out um, in the technology world for entrepreneurs, and now that is like the only thing you hear: ISV and SaaS. There's so many people vying for funding, wishing for both hardware and software developments, trying to find tech talent. So just describe to me kind of what the goal is now, what the day to day is like, and kind of the differences and parallels you see between 25 years ago in business and today.
Oh, sure. A couple of things. First of all, NTP stands for non-thermal plasma technology. We use plasma in order to ionize air. We bubble that air through water and generate nitrates. Nitrates are the main component or nitrogen feed, you could say, for crops. Um, it's a technology that's been around for 100 or so years, but was never viable at the time. So there's a great technology. It's a very clean technology using electricity, even nowadays using renewable energy, in order to power a process that is traditionally run by a process called the Haber-Bosch process, which produces like somewhere between 1.5% and 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world come from this one process. So, trying to get rid of that process to change it from a fossil fuel based to a electrical renewable energy base is what we're trying to accomplish. 100 years ago, they didn't have, you know, enough electricity, let alone electricity on a farm. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to change that dynamic of buying your fertilizer, having it shipped all over the world to an on-site production of nitrates. Um, and now it's more viable. Why? We have better technologies when it comes to compressors, better plasma technology, better power supply technology, better ways to monitor and measure what's actually happening at the farm, as opposed to 100 years ago, everything was much better off if it was centralized. Okay.
Sure.
So now that we're decentralizing everything and everything goes through cycles, we see the decentralization of fertilizer production. We want it to become sort of an appliance in your house. Um, Now it's an appliance on your farm. You need nitrates, you turn the machine on, you generate nitrates, you use it right then and there. You dial in the kind of concentrations you're looking for your particular crop and your particular soil and where the crop is in its life cycle, and you make it and you apply it right then and there. No more worries about supply chain constraints. No worries about cost volatility, price volatility. Price right now, fertilizer is tied directly to natural gas because that's one main input into the fertilizer process or the Haber-Bosch process of making fertilizers.
Right.
So you kind of get away from a lot of things, but you got to learn a couple of new things. But we're used to that as a society. Now, when it comes to the process, some of the things that I find a little challenging because you talk about SaaS, right? And how everybody's into SaaS and investing in SaaS and AI and computers and technology. And the main reason is because you can get a quick return out of it. It's really hard to get a quick return out of agricultural technologies, especially when it
Right.
comes to hard tech technologies. These things take a little longer. Today's a lot of the venture capitals in the world and even moving to others are looking at it as, you know, what can I do in order to get a return in 3 to 5 years? Well, you can't build a new technology and a new machine and expect those kinds of returns in 3 years.
Right.
You can do it in maybe 7 to 10 years, but then a lot of people don't have mandates. Their mandates for their fund is 3 to 5, seven at the outside. So you look at hard tech, and we get a lot of answers that are you're early for us. And it's not that we're early in terms of technology; it's we're early in terms of where we are in the market in order to get that hard tech built and out into the marketplace. Even though we do have um, an MVP, a prototype. It works, it generates nitrates. We know the plants want nitrates. That's pretty much proven. Our big thing is how do we take this technology and apply it economically into agriculture in order for people to actually buy it? Now, um, one of the things I say, which is sometimes it comes with good and bad responses. My first deal I did, like I said, was in the back of a napkin, $3 million, a small amount of due diligence for $1 billion fund. Um, Kind of had a business plan put together, and the old-fashioned 30 pager, but we got
Sure.
funded in like a month and a half. You know, and that was in a big fund. Now you have to look at said, well, you're in a certain stage, so now you have to do a seed fund. You have to go talk to the seed fund guys, the guys put money in early. And then it got to a pre-seed fund. And then it's like, well, only angel investors. And then it got to the point was, you just got to go back to friends and family in order to get this thing started. It was my first company. I started with $1 billion fund. Now I got to start with friends and family, which is
Right.
not the worst thing, but it shows the dynamics of the industry and the market. I always tell people, when you go to your mom for 5 grand because you want to start a company and she starts asking you what your sales are and what your cost to acquire a customer is and things like that, things have changed in the marketplace a little bit, right?
Right. Right.
So, and everybody's too many people have been watching Shark Tank for too long and think they got all the questions answered. Yeah, and that it becomes a challenge. Um, and because a lot of the questions they start to ask doesn't necessarily apply to this particular industry. The other challenge we have is, especially on the ag side, is everybody wants to go after the industrialized farming, your corn, your wheat, etc. And I'm like, that's great, but our focus is more on food. We want to do the specialty crops, which is basically what you eat. Everything you eat except for your grains is called a specialty crop. Your tomatoes, your cucumbers, your strawberries, your fruits, your nuts, vegetables, they're all called grouped under one thing called specialty crops, which of course then becomes a little challenge to find data on all these crops because there's so many small, especially when you get around the world, you know, 2 to 5 acre farms that are producing crops for local communities and they don't track anything. Having that data is very difficult to come by. However, since we're going after these smaller guys, and our product particularly is focused on farmers who farm 365 days a year and have some type of irrigation systems, kind of our sweet spot, that kind of leads us towards indoor crops, indoor growing, greenhouses. Doesn't necessarily have to be vertical farming, but they're part of it. Doesn't have to be hydroponics, but they're part of it. Any kind of things, like I said, 365 a year, as well as some type of irrigation system. Ultimately, we'd like to get to pivot sprayers, where we're injecting nitrogen into pivot sprayers and you're microdosing your fields and you're following the 4 R's of agriculture, which is, you familiar with that?
I'm not. No.
It's the right source at the right rate at the right time at the right place. So in other words, you're giving the plant the food or nutrients that it needs when it needs it, as opposed to giving it a whole ton of food and half of it going to waste. I equate
Right.
it to things like you go to a buffet. Is it more efficient to go to a buffet and eat, or is it more efficient to order your food at the table, right? Well, guess what? If you need a lot of food, you're probably better off going to the buffet. But on the other hand, when the buffet is over and all that extra food goes to waste, is it truly the most economical way of doing things? Or do you just want to tell people, look, buy two dinners, right? Or buy a dinner and an appetizer, or make it more economical that way, but then the amount of waste is a lot less. It's the same here in agriculture. If you're applying tons of fertilizer to your crops, yeah, it's cheap, so what does it matter? Well, there's a lot of runoff and there's a lot of waste. So how can we get it to the point where we're applying the fertilizer, the food for our crops at the right rate, the right time, the right source, the right place, etc. And a lot of people are working on that. Precision agriculture is going to be great. Why? Because it's going to tell you exactly what plant needs what nutrients at what time. That's going to be awesome. That's going to give us the ability to then apply that technology or those fertilizers when they need it. Whereas today it's sort of a blanket, hey, just go do the North 40. And that's it.
Right.
We used to have crop dusting. At least they kind of got rid of that a little bit. I know some people still do it, but if there are other ways that produce less waste, that's what we're sort of looking and targeting, especially with the price of fertilizer when it triples in a year due to something that you have no control over, like a war in the
Right.
Ukraine, might be something we should think about.
So what's kind of been your superpower through all these processes? Looking back over that whole, even before the dot-com bubble to where you're at now, what has been that thing that's helped you continue to kind of push forward? Like, what's kind of been your superpower through this whole thing? What do you do well that keeps the ball rolling?
Well, you need a touch of insanity. Um, and it's mainly because, look, I enjoy doing this. I don't know if I could handle a day-to-day operating job that would be the same for the next 25 years. Okay. So what gets me
Right.
going is the interest, the knowledge, the education. I mean, my background is I have a master's in biochemical engineering. So I'm interested very much in the biological side and the engineering side. It's interesting when I got out of college, it's probably dating myself, but there was no real such thing. I created my major because nobody was doing it. All the engineers, especially chemical engineers, were all focused on the oil and gas industry because that's where all the big money was. That's where everybody was getting their wanted engineers for. Whereas I was looking more on the biological side. I always believed that biology could help us tremendously in understanding not only what's going on around us, but how we can actually encourage them to help ourselves. And people say there's plus and minuses with GMO. There's plus and minuses with the chemicals and pesticides that we use, and I'd love to see us getting to a cleaner and greener future in agriculture. It's kind of our tagline. Um, but I think that all these things are sort of part of the progress. You got to take kind of steps in the right direction and hopefully realize and recognize maybe when there's a better way to move to that better way, not necessarily always the cheaper way. But what kind of gets me moving is I got a bunch of kids and they're very much into the environment and into seeing things be better. In fact, when I was working for oil and gas in the 90s, people used to come to me and say, oil and gas is so bad. Look at all the pollution we're creating, et cetera. And I said, look, I can have every oil executive in the world tomorrow agree to move towards renewable energy 100%. You just need to pay like $10 to $15 per gallon of gas, and they'll be happy to take that money and do something with it. But of course, nobody
Right.
wants to do that, right? So, there's always that balance that, I, I can't go all renewable because I got to drive 1,000 miles today, and it just doesn't make sense for me to do it. But you know what? If all I'm doing is driving around town, maybe that does make sense. And that kind of gets me to another point, which is what we're trying to do in the fertilizer industry is sort of what they're doing in fossil fuel. You got renewable energy. There is no one renewable energy solution. You have solar, you have wind, you have geothermal, you have all kinds of different ways to generate energy that's different than burning fossil fuels. Has a little less, pollutants associated with it or environmental impact. We're trying to do the same thing on the fertilizer side that says, look, we're big proponents of, regenerative agriculture. We're proponents of biostimulants. We're proponents on slow release fertilizers, on doing things differently. We just see ourselves as another tool that the farmer can use in certain instances that's going to give them um, make their life a little easier. Okay, and hopefully keep some of those costs down and take a little bit of that uncertainty in their life sort of away.
I can I understand that, and I have an appreciation for that. Um, like kind of the realization that I'm hearing through this conversation is it is refreshing to have people take a new technology based data driven look at industries that we kind of put this legacy tag on, right? Like a lot of people can't understand because they can't wrap their head around the rate of return or waiting 10 or 12 years back for their money for agricultural hard tech.
I'm
But
telling
I
you,
know that it
that's
is
in this country. You start going internationally, and I've talked to a lot of people in different countries. I've been to Dubai and Singapore and all those other places. 10 to 12 years okay with them.
yeah, they're okay with playing the long game. That's interesting as well, huh?
Because they see it. I was talking to somebody in Southern California who was part of the Farmers in Southern California Association. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong, but he's like, indoor farming is kind of a, vertical farming is kind of a joke. And I said,
Sure.
well, I think they're going to figure it out. I said, but
Yeah.
I was in Dubai the other day, and he's like, well, wait a second, that's a totally different story. I said, okay, so what you're telling me is it's not a joke for everybody. It just seems to be not appropriate for where you are in Southern California, which produces a tremendous amount of food for this country. And I said, I get that. But places like Dubai in the Middle East and Singapore, they have these mandates for food security that they want to see more and more indoor farming and producing more food locally. And guess what? In Dubai, not much grows outside. That might find that hard to believe. And in Singapore, you don't have much land. So, what are your alternatives? So, that's why there's all these big pushes towards indoor farming and vertical farming. Now, after going to a lot of different conferences, one of the challenges people have had, and I tend to agree with this, and I haven't done deep digging, but one of the problems vertical farming had was you took in this, like you said, this old industry, legacy type industry, and you had a bunch of technology guys come and say, "Hey, we're going to disrupt this industry by adding technology." And they all had wanted patents, and they all didn't want to talk to each other about what was happening, and nobody wanted to say what they were doing to make this better. So everybody spent a ton of money, as I would say, reinventing the wheel. We already had a wheel. It worked fine. Could we get a better wheel? Sure. But instead of telling everybody else about what was going on and how to improve that, we ended up, everybody spent way too much money on something that didn't get us very far. Now, I think they're going to figure it out because I do think vertical farming and indoor farming is very appropriate in certain areas for certain circumstances. I think having local food is much more nutritious for us, which I think is great. I think it's fresher, healthier, supporting the local economy, doing something with buildings that are being abandoned all over the place in strip malls. Let's turn them into indoor farms. I think all that stuff is great. Um, but they didn't really communicate with each other. And if you think about farming, the reason farmers did well is because they all talked to each other. Because they all said, hey, I did this last year and it worked great. Maybe you should. And everybody was really appreciative of that. And as a community, they really helped each other out. And as a community, the tide floats all boats. Everybody kind of rose.
Right.
And you don't get that today in today's world. And you took a legacy system that was built on that, or an industry built on that kind of cooperative nature, and turning it into more like a little bit more of a cutthroat business. And you didn't work out so well.
Right. Um, no,
That's just my opinion.
I can understand that. What has been difficult? What has been difficult to forecast for you? I know we talked a little bit about your superpower, but what makes this whole journey harder or longer than maybe it needs to be?
I think access to capital always becomes a challenge,
Sure.
and there's lots of different ways to get capital. Um, I've had, I've got a bunch of letters of support from farmers that say they want to see this. I've won a bunch of competitions that say um, that farmers want this. And last year I won what they call the bullpen, which is a prize that's supported and I guess provided by the Virginia Farm Bureau. And we won, and they said, "Hey, this is something we'd love to see go further. We're not sure it fits today, but can it go further?" And then I get the investors saying there's no product market fit,
Mm.
and I'm like, "How can you say that?" I said, "I've talked to a bunch of people, and part of it was because agriculture is a little new, and maybe I was talking to the wrong investors. I needed to be talking to more ag specific investors." So I
Sure.
said, "Okay, I get that." So I took a trip out to the Iowa Expo, Farm Expo, Ag Expo out in Iowa. Definitely a different world from being on the East Coast. Great people. you could see what their livelihood was made of in terms of farming, and that's what they were into. But then I started talking to a whole bunch of investors there, and the investors all wanted to know how I was going to, how this fits into the corn market. And my response was, it doesn't today. Today, you buy fertilizer at, 60, 80 cents a pound for nitrogen. I said, I can't compete with that. You're buying truckloads of it. I said, maybe one day when I build a machine, the size of one of your combines, which by the way is the size of a house, I
Right.
could do that. But my machine right now is the size of a dishwasher. And I'm not going to go and spend, $5 million on a house prototype today. I'd rather start with a small unit that I'm starting to put into a market that needs it a little bit more, that's probably paying $8 a pound for nitrogen because they're buying it in pallets and bags.
Yeah.
They're not buying the
From
volume you're
Home
buying because they're
Depot
buying
and
it for their greenhouse or for indoor production. I'd rather start with them, then move on to the corn guys. But the other problem with corn is, the way they actually farm. The way they farm is they put down fertilizer and they watch the corn grow. Well, that's not a great 4 R's kind of right place, right time, right this kind of thing. So they are changing that with precision technologies and drone technologies and imaging and things like that, which is great. So at some point in time, I do think instead of building a machine the size of a house, I can build the machine the size of a shed or maybe a container that will actually provide enough nitrogen because they've realized that they don't need nearly as much nitrogen as they're putting down because so much is going to waste.
right,
But that's going to come
right.
with time.
Yeah, for sure. No, it definitely will. And Anna, like you said, I mean, their exterior kind of catalyst for the importance of your product, right? Like, and depending on maybe which way you view the world based on what's happening politically or things happening around the world that I'm not wise to. Um, it dictates the cost of the product that you are competing against or attempting to supplement, right? Like when the war on Ukraine happened, you may know more of the data on this than me, but what was the increase in price percentage wise to consumers like myself with a garden or a greenhouse?
Um, with a garden, there wasn't too much. It probably went up maybe doubled.
Mm,
With farmers who were buying large quantities and large volumes, it tripled. And it was mostly on the nitrogen side. And the reason that
sure.
is, Russia exports 23% of the fertilizer to the world. If you ever looked at a map of like fertilizer movements, a lot of it comes out of there. Ukraine has the largest ammonia plant in all of Europe. Okay. And that means that with that being in trouble, people were worried about where they were going to get their fertilizer from. Ammonia is the precursor to making your calcium nitrates, your ureas, your potassium
Right.
nitrates, all of your fertilizer, kind of salt-based granular fertilizer that you used. Oh, by the way, our product's salt-free. I probably should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what ended up happening, the prices went up. Part of it was the uncertainty, but they were also shutting down fertilizer plants. Why? Because they were worried about how they were going to the alternative for the input of natural gas is to heat your home. And they were worried about, hey, if we push all this stuff to fertilizer, we won't be able to heat our homes. Why? Because the big pipelines coming from Russia for natural gas into Europe, what if they shut them down?
Right.
What's going to happen then? So people started storing a lot of natural gas for the future, and therefore they're saying, "Oh, let's shut down the fertilizer plants." And some of that happened, and some of it didn't. But most of the things that happen with price volatility has to do with uncertainty and not necessarily actually what's happening. Okay, I'll give you a good example that I always use from our good old oil industry days. In the 1980s, when there were lines to pick up gasoline at your local gas station, um, the problem was, and the prices went through the roof. The challenge was that every single oil tank in the United States was full of gasoline. Every tank that could be full was full. Yet we were having a hard time at the gas stations. And the reason for this also happened for the pandemic in food, was because what we call tertiary storage became overwhelming. So if you look at your gas tank today in your car, you may be at quarter a tank, half a tank of gas. Well, what if every single person in the country who was running on a quarter tank, half a tank of gas, all within the same day decided, I need to fill up my tank? What happens? Well, the entire supply chain gets out of whack. It's not that I
Right.
don't have enough gas in this country, it's that we don't have enough trucks to get it to the gas stations to fill them up in order to actually fill those gas tanks.
Right. We have
Same
the
thing happened with
appropriate
food.
amount, the non-apocalyptic amount of trucks.
Correct. Same thing happened during the pandemic in food. What happened is
Right.
everybody's freezer, when you open a freezer, it was half full. All of a sudden, the pandemic happens, everybody's freezer is full. That tertiary storage of every freezer in this country having to go from half full to full wiped out every supermarket. That's what happens when you get supply chain disruptions of that kind of magnitude.
Right. And your product is an incredible supplement for not if but when something like that happens in the nitrogen space. Tell me this, we're kind of approaching
Absolutely.
our time here. How can we
I
support
talk a
you?
lot. Sorry
What?
about that.
No, no, don't be sorry at all. This is what this platform is here for, and I've learned a lot. Actually, I'm very interested in what it is that you do. I really enjoy the science more than anything. It's definitely how my mind works. But how can we support you? How can we support your company? What are some actionable steps that we can take, or maybe some introductions that I can make to people in my network that may be of benefit to you?
Um, Two things, capital and customers. Um, we've got people that are interested in testing when we get our next machine built. Like I said, we got a prototype. We're in the process of raising capital in order to get the next larger machine built. So we're looking at that. We're thinking about maybe doing, some sort of crowdfunding,
Sure.
because of the challenges we're seeing with the venture capital world and the fact that they need longer, a shorter time frame for them to make their returns. We're looking for people that are interested in seeing something good happen, but it might take a little longer. Um, and then we're always interested in talking to customers and how this technology might apply to them. If they're willing to say, "Hey, this sounds great. We'd love to test it out. Love to try it out. This is how we think it would help us." That'd be great. A good example is, there was an outdoor farmer in California who, buys hundreds of thousands of pounds of fertilizer. And I said, "Look, I can't compete with that." He said, "No, we got pepper plants. Our pepper plants right now, we prefer not to add salt to our soil. We prefer not to have, we have irrigation systems, but we prefer not to have salt that could precipitate out and clog our systems. So this might be a solution. We understand it might be a little more expensive to start, but I think it'll help us in our process." So that was a kind of eye-opening to me. Then there's other places like golf courses, football stadiums. There's all kinds of places that use fertilizer that this might be a solution for. And you got to remember, nitrogen is 60% of our fertilizer consumption is all about buying nitrogen for our plants.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm in Atlanta, a little bit west of Atlanta, actually, so I know no shortage of farmers. We actually have a bunch of connections out
Interesting.
near. I'm saying again. I'm sorry.
I said that's interesting because we talked to some people in Georgia, blueberry farmers.
Oh yeah, there's
Blueberry
tons.
farmers
There's tons.
farm a little differently than everybody else does, and could you really use our system because our technology can be used as a foliar spray. You don't have to
Well,
worry
I
about
know a
hurting
really
the
big
crop.
one. I know a
Yeah,
really big one. My childhood best friend manages their entire farm. I think their farm is somewhere excess of 1,000 acres. It's a big farm. I
that's a
know
big
because I
farm.
used to run a lawnmower in between blueberry bushes for 12 hours a day when I needed money. So, I can make an introduction to you whenever you're ready. He's a super nice guy, super hospitable. Definitely knows. He actually, um, I can't remember exactly what his degree, and he went to UGA with me, but he graduated with an agricultural degree and is now he actually was contracted with Rambo Nursery for a long time, and now is with this massive farm. But I can make that introduction for you as well. And then as far as capital goes, I don't know. That's not really my area of expertise. Maybe someone in the audience will know someone that's a better applicable match for those things. But we'll try to make some connections for you and begin seeing this thing through. If there's just a tiny bit of effort I can make for 7 or 10 years until your vision kind of turns into reality, you get past that prototype phase and you find a use case and things continue to trend exactly how they are trending in the fertilizer world exported from Eastern Europe and Russia. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see where you go, and I'm interested in kind of being a piece of the puzzle that can help you solve those things. So, if you're interested, just tell me. I'll make that introduction to my friend to you, and I look forward to seeing
I
where
am
you go, and I
definitely.
look forward to encouraging the rest of the audience to burn the ship as well. There's a bunch of steps, there's a bunch of learning that goes into it, but if you really want to make an impact, you want to find something that people understand and can relate to. These are the things that you have to experience. So I appreciate you sharing those things with us, John.
Absolutely. And if you can go to ntptechnologies.com, there's a lot of information there. There's a form at the back if you want to get in touch with us, or you can just send me an email at info@ntptechnologies.com, and it comes directly to my box, and I'll be happy to talk to you about whatever we talked about today and about your business and how you're trying to scale.
Tim, I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Anybody that's willing to, like I said, share some time with me and the audience in the podcast, and then even take that a step further of offering that level of consultation to the people that are listening is near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate that. I'll let you know once we get done with the production side of this stuff and whenever it's coming out. Obviously, that's already happened if you are listening, but please share the episode. Please like it. Please send John a message. Thank him from us for being a guest on the podcast. And if you have connections for Here Is Network, I am sure they would be very valuable, well appreciated, and well handled. So thanks, John. We'll talk to you again soon, okay? Everybody else, burn the ship.